a wooded island in the middle of the long-lost Tethys Sea in what would eventually become Eastern Europe. Sparse patches of trees give way to dense forests with clearings dotted here and there. It is in these clearings that some of the best browsing can be found, with lush vegetation having no problem receiving the sunlight it needs to grow. The air is warm and the skies are quiet, save for the distant screeching of small pterosaurs in the trees. Rustling from the forest betrays the presence of a small group of sauropods, with emphasis on the word small. Measuring a little under 6 meters, a small family of Magyarosaurus dacus, believe it or not a species of titanosaur, have approached the forest clearing with the intention of making the most of the afternoon sun, as well as the plant growth it permits. Several adults and a few babies can be seen here, their long necks and tails only a fraction of the size of their cousins on the mainland. Satisfied that the coast is clear, the adults tuck into their meal, and the young soon follow their lead, filling their stomachs after a long morning of wandering through the woodlands. It doesn't take long before one of the adults spots something strange in the sky, a series of odd, horizontally flat shapes that have appeared in front of the sun. He can't be certain what he's looking at. This is a particularly bright day, and it wouldn't pay to linger his gaze on that strange, burning ball of light in the sky. Cautiously checking every few seconds between bites of plant matter, he can't help but wonder if those strange shapes are growing bigger. That's when it dawns on him. Danger. Extreme danger. Calling out to his family to signal the threat of a predator, he starts to trot off into the tree line, seconds before the sun appears to be blotted out by a colossal aerial shadow. Turning back to assess the situation once safely behind the trees, his worst terrors are confirmed. Hatzegopteryx. 3 gigantic azhdarchid pterosaurs, each standing as tall as a modern-day giraffe, have descended upon his herd, and one by one are effortlessly swallowing his offspring, using their titanic beaks as chopsticks. With long necks and upright, almost alien posture, the 3 predators occasionally call out to one another with guttural squawking notes, scouring the foliage for anything hiding within. Satisfied that they've had their fill, they take to the skies on leathery wings, battering the tree line with their wingtips as they leave. Racked with panic and adrenaline, the only thing the remaining Magyarosaurus can do is return to the safety of the woods. On Hateg Island, nothing is as it seems. As you may have guessed, the subject of today's video is Hatzegopteryx, a gigantic azhdarchid pterosaur that lived 66 million years ago in the final act of the Late Cretaceous. Hateg Island, the only place where its fossils have ever been found, no longer exists as an island, but as part of the Eastern European nation of Romania, which is where our story takes place. Today, we will be exploring the life, discovery, and paleoenvironment of one of prehistory's most bizarre apex predators, taking to the ancient skies of one of the strangest ecosystems the world has ever seen. Sit back and relax as we take you back through time to meet Hatzegopteryx, one of the biggest flying animals ever to live on planet Earth. This wandering colossus, adept at traveling both through the ancient skies and across the misty, wooded plains of Hateg, was an azhdarchid. Azhdarchids were, without competition, the largest animals ever to take to the skies, and are a family of pterosaurs that include both the mighty Quetzalcoatlus and Aramborgiania, 2 famous giants. Hatzegopteryx, while not matching up to the size of Quetzalcoatlus, was an animal of considerable size, measuring between 10 and 12 meters from wingtip to wingtip and 4.5 meters tall when standing on the ground. Like many pterosaurs, this flying reptile would have been utterly unlike anything alive in the modern day, walking on stilted, seemingly awkward forelimbs, and carrying its immense head high off the ground on a long neck. The head of Hatzegopteryx would have been one of its most striking features in life, thought to measure over 2.5 meters alone from the base of its neck to the tip of its huge forceps-like beak. Unlike many of the smaller pterosaurs, Hatzegopteryx's skull and beak would have been made robust and heavier, and took a great deal of muscle to hold up. As such, many of the bones have large ridges where muscles could be joined up, allowing the animal to comfortably stalk across the plains of Hateg Island without sustaining long-term damage to its body. Moreover, Hatzegopteryx could open its mouth considerably wide, as noted by the grooves at the location where the animal's jaw was attached. Although Hatzegopteryx is known from incomplete remains, scientists have been able to infer what the animal might have looked like by comparing the known fossil elements with the body proportions of completely known pterosaurs. A good example of this can be seen in the analysis of the pterosaur's neck vertebrae, the known fragment of which measures just over 9 inches long. When compared with the neck vertebrae of other species of pterosaur, scientists have suggested that the missing bone elements would make the particular vertebrae about 12 inches in length, with some of the larger vertebrae possibly measuring as long as 16 inches. Although the skull of Hatzegopteryx has not been discovered in full, scientists have suggested that it may have possessed a crest similar to that seen in Quetzalcoatlus on account of the structure of its skull. If so, this crest may have been brightly colored, contrasted with the possible dull brown and black colors on its body. We can't say for sure exactly what color Hatzegopteryx may have been until paleontologists discover pigments within its remains, however. Most, if not all, pterosaurs were covered in a layer of pycnofibers across their bodies, necks, and heads. These filaments weren't quite feathers, nor were they hair, but would have resembled a mixture of both. Pycnofibers would have helped insulate a pterosaur, and in some species may have been adorned with markings and patterns to help with signaling and communication. Pycnofibers evolved separately to feathers and hair, and are an example of convergent evolution, where 2 or more groups of unrelated animals evolve the same physiological features to help them fill the same ecological niche. Hatzegopteryx's story in human terms begins towards the end of the 1970s and was actually part of a student dig in the Middle Densis-Kula Formation. This dig took place specifically in Rakitova, a commune of several villages in Transylvania, Romania, part of the Hateg Basin that once contained the long-lost island. The rocks from these regions have been identified as belonging to the Maastrichtian stage of the Late Cretaceous, the very last act of the Mesozoic era, before the extinction of the dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and large marine reptiles. As such, Hatzegopteryx would have been one of the last pterosaurs alive on Earth when the Chicxulub meteor struck the Gulf of Mexico 66 million years ago. Students investigating the rocks that used to belong to Hateg Island were surprised to discover several notable fragments of bone from a very peculiar animal, a pterosaur nearing the size and shape of the legendary Quetzalcoatlus of North America. This specimen of the animal was fragmentary at best, consisting of 2 segments of the lower back of the skull and a heavily warped segment of the left humerus. Interestingly, it wasn't immediately apparent that these bones belonged to a giant pterosaur, and as such were initially believed to be the remains of a large theropod dinosaur, an easy mistake to make given the condition of the find. It wasn't until separate studies on the bones in 2002 by paleontologists Eric Buffeteau, Dan Grigoresco, and Zoltan Chiki that the animal was eventually recognized as a gargantuan species of pterosaur, and it was eventually described and named. The species was named Hatzegopteryx thambema, derived from Greek and meaning terror wing from Hateg, in relation to the location of the bones and the immense size of this aerial apex predator. The densest Kula Formation makes up but one fossil locality of many that compose the ancient island of Hateg, and Hatzegopteryx fossils have been discovered in several of these additional formations. To this date, bones attributed to the giant pterosaur have been discovered in Romania's San Petru Formation and Sebeș Formation, and their respective finds represent different parts of the animal's body. Shoulder blades, mandibles, neck vertebrae, and elements of the limbs are known, but the animal is still incomplete. Still, given the known fossil content, scientists have been able to reveal a great deal about this animal, and due to its size and status as an apex predator, it has gained significant media attention over the years following its discovery. It is important to note that Hatzegopteryx was a much stouter, more robust pterosaur than its other giant azhdarchid cousins. Its vertebrae were reinforced and dense, and larger muscle attachments can be found across the known fossil elements. As such, this was known to be a strong animal that could likely lift considerable weight when carrying prey items to its nest or territory. The neck was flexible, with adaptations present within the bones to help it reduce stress on the muscles when carrying prey. Such adaptations include significant articular joints and thick walled vertebrae. Further evidence of this can be seen in the well-developed muscle attachments on the head and neck, some of which have been scarred from consistent use. As a result of its build and musculature, Hatzegopteryx is so far the heaviest flying animal ever discovered. Its relatives, such as the huge Aramborgiania, did not possess such developments in the head and neck, and as such are thought to have been much more gracile, perhaps picking off smaller prey or feeding as scavengers on the ground. Unlike smaller pterosaurs who sometimes caught fish, small vertebrates, and insects on the wing, Hatzegopteryx would have been more than capable of hunting considerably larger prey on the ground. It is thought to have descended from the skies onto its prey, using its aerial advantage to secure a position in which it would be difficult for its victim to escape. Using its deep, sharp beak, it would have been able to pick up small dinosaurs clear off the ground, some of which, if small enough, could be swallowed whole by throwing the head back and gulping them down. Prey items that were too big to be consumed in one go were possibly grasped within the beak and slammed against the ground, the impact of which would have helped both incapacitate and dispatch the animal. The critically acclaimed 2023 documentary Prehistoric Planet, which depicts Hatzegopteryx in full CGI glory, showed a scenario very similar to the one we detailed at the beginning of this video, where the huge pterosaurs descended on an unlucky herd of Tethys hadros, an ornithopod native to Hateg Island. While the juvenile herbivores were eventually found hiding in the vegetation and were snapped up as a quick meal, the adults made a beeline for the woods, where it is suggested Hatzegopteryx was unable to follow. The densely packed foliage of the woodland would have been a logistical nightmare for a predator that relied on tactics and accuracy in sniping its prey from the ground, so it is thought to have favored the open plains and river valleys of Hateg. Hateg Island, when present in the ancient Tethys Sea, was a land of woodlands and plains 31,000 square miles across, situated on what would eventually become the continental border between Eastern Europe and Western Asia. This is roughly an area the size of Ireland for comparison. In the Maastrichtian, Hateg would have been part of a vast archipelago that harbored a huge number of unique life forms. The animals present on Hateg were, over the millions of years they became isolated from the creatures of the mainland, subject to insular gigantism and insular dwarfism, Collectively known as island syndrome, such events take place when island-dwelling animals become separated from their counterparts on the mainland, leading to evolutionary oddities and changes in behavior from the norm. This would explain, for example, the gigantic proportions of Hatzegopteryx compared to the relatively tiny Magyarosaurus, a titanosaur whose mainland relatives were some of the largest animals ever to walk the earth. Other animals that lived alongside Hatzegopteryx on Hateg Island included other, smaller azhdarchid pterosaurs, such as azhdarchid, as well as small pteranodontids that as of yet are undescribed. On the ground lived Belauer, thought to either be a basal bird or a derived dromaeosaur, which may have actually been herbivorous. Under Hatzegopteryx's domain, large carnivorous theropods were absent. Magyarosaurus and Paludititan represented the dwarf titanosaurs of Hateg, which were accompanied by the small ornithopods Zalmoxes and Talmatosaurus. In the rivers and lakes of this paradoxical island lived small crocodilians such as Doratodon, which lived alongside snakes and amphibians. In the woodlands, a plethora of small early mammals thrived, including Lidovoi and Barbadodon amongst others. Presiding over the ecosystem was the mighty Hatzegopteryx, which would have most likely not been a fussy feeder, capable of snatching dinosaurs, small reptiles, and mammals alike. So that is the story of the colossal pterosaur Hatzegopteryx, the heaviest animal ever to fly, and as such also one of the very largest. To picture such an animal alive today, an aerial apex predator the size of a giraffe is hard to do. Such an animal would likely have had no problems consuming animals as large as humans, and its colossal wingspan would have made it without a doubt one of the most awe-inspiring and intimidating sights in nature. With any luck, more fossil content will be discovered from this animal in the future, so that we may get a clearer image of what Hatzegopteryx looked like and how it lived on the long-lost island of Hateg.